Hello, everybody. David Schuster here. Another day and more proof that Ohio Republican Senator J.D. Vance is a Donald Trump liability. By now, you've probably heard about Vance's childless cat lady comments. Well, Vance is being dragged through the litter box again, this time because the Harris campaign has unearthed another old video in which Vance echoes the same sentiments.
Right, there's just these basic cadences of life that I think are really powerful and really valuable when you have kids in your life. And the fact that so many people, especially in America's leadership class, just don't have that in their lives, I worry that it makes people more sociopathic and ultimately our whole country a little bit less less mentally stable. And of course, you talk about going on Twitter. Final point I'll make is you go on Twitter and almost always the people who are most deranged and most psychotic are people who don't have kids at home.
Actually, the most deranged and psychotic are people with kids but who do not have help. Now, do people who have kids and help, are they less deranged, less sociopathic and psychotic than, say, people who have no kids whatsoever? I mean, I don't know. It sort of depends on the situation. All of us know families that are absolutely nuts, the children included, and we also know single people who have completely lost their mind. I think the point that J.D. Vance is trying to get at is that if you have children and the responsibilities that go with it, yes, perhaps there's a certain level of stability that maybe that forces you to have that people without kids aren't necessarily having to look at. But the way that J.D. Vance tried to phrase it was so offensive and so bizarre that it angered people across the political spectrum. Well, recently on Fox News, weekend host Trey Gowdy hosted J.D. Vance and tried to engage in a little bit of damage control. Watch.
I've heard from many women, most of whom are conservative, and they would very much like to vote for President Trump and you, but Senator, they are disappointed. So nuns and priests aside, do you agree that there are people who very much love this country and are invested in its future, but they also happen to be childless?
Oh, of course I believe that, Trey. And if you look at the full context of what I said, it's very clear the Democrats have tried to take this thing out of context and blow it out of proportion, which is what they always do, Trey, because they don't have an agenda to run on themselves.
Democrats blow things out of context and they don't have a full pro-family agenda. Really? Things like pre-K, child care services, free school lunches, expanding child tax credits, raising working class wages so families have more to spend on things like groceries and other family-related items like child care. Oh, and by the way, protecting kids and families from guns through common sense gun regulations. I mean, the argument from Republicans that there's not a pro-family agenda, well, if you want to reduce this just to a bumper sticker, you could argue that the Republican agenda is simply the pro-birth agenda, not pro-family, but pro-birth, and that once a child is born and out of the womb, well, then that child and their family, they're entirely on their own without any sort of government help or assistance. And you could also take it a step further and say that the only agenda Republicans really have is whatever their corporate donors tell them. If it's an energy company, an oil company that wants to continue to pollute the environment with fewer regulations, fine, no problem, the Republicans will be for that. If it's the National Rifle Association which says, oh no, we don't want any sort of restrictions on guns, we want more guns than ever, Republicans are fine with that. If it's the pharmaceuticals which want to keep prices high, oh yeah, that's the agenda for Republicans. It's the corporate donors that Republicans seem beholden to. Democrats, while they do have their own problems with corporate donations, at least one could argue that Democrats have a more pro-family agenda than Republicans like to claim. Now, a couple things about J.D. Vance, because clearly he is the blueprint for Donald Trump, only the problem J.D. Vance has is that he doesn't have Donald Trump's charisma. And what this shows is that it's not enough for Republicans in the future, if Donald Trump, say, loses, it's not enough for Republicans just to replicate the MAGA policies. The MAGA movement is much more than that. It is literally a cult of personality. And we're seeing that because on paper, J.D. Vance and other Republicans like Ron DeSantis and maybe even Ted Cruz, they can check off all of the MAGA boxes in terms of policy, but what they are missing is the charisma and authenticity that Donald Trump brings to a campaign and to politics.
So when you fill up your tank at the gas station, maybe you should send a bill to Kamala Harris.
You get the sense with J.D. Vance, who was just calling Donald Trump like Hitler a few years ago, that J.D. Vance is only faking his admiration now for Donald Trump, because he wanted to be Donald Trump's running mate, and he is. And the same thing with Ted Cruz, and the same thing with Ron DeSantis. It's hard to sort of know what they believe and what they truly stand for because they don't have the authenticity that Donald Trump seems to have. Now, we might authentically believe that Donald Trump is authentically crazy and a sociopath and narcissistic, but Donald Trump is who he is. If you meet him in person, if you see him on camera, if you see him at a speech, he's the same person.
You know, I do the weave. You know what the weave is? I'll talk about like 9 different things and they all come back brilliantly together. And it's like, and friends of mine that are like English professors, they say, it's the most brilliant thing I've ever seen.
And that cult of personality is drawn to somebody who is that authentic. So when we think about the future, we think, okay, there's a possibility Donald Trump loses. What does the MAGA Republican movement look like in 2028? Well, Republicans and Democrats, if you go back to previous presidential nominees, there has never been a time in modern U.S. political history where somebody has been a nominee twice, lost twice, and gotten a third chance. Adlai Stevenson was the last for the Republicans, and he did not get a third chance after he lost twice. So Donald Trump, if he loses in 2024, that's it. The Republican Party is going to have a civil war. There's going to be a fight over the future and who will run in 2028. But I think the key message and the key lesson we should learn from all of this with the Trump experiment, and as we've seen with J.D. Vance and the problems that he has had in speaking and trying to articulate his positions and trying to show some level of humanity, is that this isn't just about policies with Republicans, and I would say it's less about policies and more about personality. That Donald Trump has proven the Republican Party can stand for style over substance. The style being Donald Trump's charisma, the ability to entertain and attract a crowd and be politically incorrect and funny to a lot of people. That means more, I believe, to the MAGA movement than any particular policy that Donald Trump has espoused. This whole thing about America first and not having troops overseas and focusing on things like the border and stopping immigrants, I think that is secondary. To me, the key issue for the MAGA movement and the future Republicans is who's going to grab this mantle of personal charisma and personality? Who's going to be able to say, I'm the most interesting person out there, that I can communicate well, that I can laugh at other people, and then I can say things that are politically incorrect and get away with it. Donald Trump's the only one who's been able to do that. And to me, the future of the Republican Party is going to be a battle, again, over the stylistic differences that may exist between Republicans who want to run again, and not so much over the policies. Because as we've seen, J.D. Vance has articulated the policies of the MAGA Republican movement, and he has not come across well at all.
Kamala Harris has decided who's going to be her vice presidential pick, and y'all got elected at the same time. You South Dakota, him in Minnesota. What do we need to know about Walz?
Well, he's a radical.
That is South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem, who's been pushing the Republican talking point that Tim Walz is too radical. Radical? I mean, this Kristi Noem, I mean, she's not the VP pick, I mean, for multiple reasons, one of them being that she shot her dog. Back to her thoughts on Tim Walz.
I served with him in Congress for several years, too, and then we both ran as governor at the same time. But it was interesting how different decisions impacted the people in our states differently. You know, if you remember, he shut down his state, he mandated masks and vaccines, he attacked me for hosting the Sturgis motorcycle bike rally. He said he would have absolutely not held it, and he said that this place was spreading COVID and was something that America shouldn't give place to.
This is an outdoor event.
It is an outdoor event, and people, what I love about Sturgis is these people here love their freedom, and they understand that government shouldn't take it away.
Yes, the government shouldn't take away your freedoms. Okay, Kristi Noem, you're supporting a candidate that supports Project 2025. You support Project 2025. It's all of your platforms that you're secretly, supporting and also openly supporting. Now on to Tim Walz, because he had an incredible response when asked if his policies are too radical.
But you've legalized recreational marijuana, you passed universal background checks on guns, you expanded LGBTQ protections, you implemented tuition-free college for low-income Minnesotans. There's free breakfast and lunch for school kids. Do you think your record is an asset to the ticket, or would it risk fueling Trump's attacks as you being a big government liberal?
What a monster. Kids are eating and having full bellies so they can go learn, and women are making their own health care decisions. And we're a top 5 business state, and We also rank in the top 3 of happiness. Look, they're going to label whatever they're going to label. He's going to roll it out, mispronounce names, to try and make the case. The fact of the matter is, where you see the policies that Vice President Harris was a part of making, Democratic governors across the country executed those policies, and quality of life is higher, the economies are better, all of those things. Educational attainment is better. So yeah, my kids are going to eat here, and you're going to have a chance to go to college, and you're going to have an opportunity to live where we're working on reducing carbon emissions. Oh, and by the way, you're going to have personal incomes that are higher, and you're going to have health insurance. So if that's where they want to label me, I'm more than happy to take the label.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That was such a good response by Tim Walz. How did the Democrats get good at messaging? Like in the last 2 weeks, Democrats shouldn't worry about being called socialist or communist because of their policies, because Republicans are just going to call them socialist and communist anyway.
And you're not going to be allowed. You're all going to be thrown into a communist system. It's a communist system. You're going to be thrown into a system where everybody gets health care.
Republicans are going to call Democrats socialist and communist because they know that their voter base cannot define socialist and communist. They don't know. No one's read theory. What's even better news for Democrats is that even GOP pollsters like Frank Luntz admit that the communism smear tactic isn't working.
Frank, when it comes to the economic plans, we heard the vice president lay out part of her economic agenda today. Donald Trump, at his news conference yesterday, tried to get ahead and cast her as a communist. Take a listen.
Now Kamala is reportedly proposing communist price controls. She wants price controls. It leads to food shortages, rationing, hunger, dramatically more inflation. She's running on the Maduro plan. I think this is a different kind of a race. All we have to do is define our opponent as being a communist or a socialist or somebody that's going to destroy our country.
Frank, I think that's the former president lays it out right there, right? We're trying to define our opponent. They're very clearly trying to define her as a communist. Her policies aren't communist policies, although they are aggressive in terms of how they operate within markets. How do you think that line of attack is landing right now?
It isn't. And it's one of the reasons why Trump has been declining in every survey in just about every state over the last 3 weeks. The public absolutely wants to focus on inflation, on affordability. They absolutely care about prices for food and fuel, housing and healthcare. And they're not asking for an ideological solution. They're asking for a day-to-day solution. What Harris proposed in the last few hours is going to play well with voters, at least initially, because they're looking at their wallets and their pocketbooks, and they're saying, I can't afford day-to-day life.
It is kind of funny to me how there is this arrogance that's sort of melting away. You still see it, but it's just not working anymore. The MAGA movement has become incredibly arrogant because they were able to say and do anything they wanted, and it was just accepted by their own people. It was accepted by the party, and everything they did sort of worked for their own base. And that's not the case anymore. It's like the MAGA movement. The Republican Party knows that the MAGA movement is severely damaging, and they really can't do anything at this point. I mean, that ship sailed. So it's pretty funny to me to watch, and this arrogance is on full display. We have Project 2025. They should not have released Project 2025. Why would you release that? Right? Why would you put that on display? They put it on display because they're doing it the way they've done everything else, where they would just openly do something and then gaslight anyone that spoke about it, right? Now they're trying to actively gaslight us and be like, oh, well, we have nothing to do with Project 2025. We had everyone that worked for the Trump administration that was loyal to him, through thick and thin, helped write it. But I mean, it's not like we're going to actually do anything about it. Why would we do that? Why would we write 800, 900 pages? And so it's coming to haunt them. I mean, Kristi Noem, she was actually incredibly well liked within the Republican Party. I've had tons of interviews with MAGA, where they have said, she is like, she's their traditional Republican, she's also, far right and, has their same values and, balance the ticket, blah, blah, blah. And she's a woman, right? I mean, I thought, Trump was going to pick a woman to be his VP. That would have been like slick move. It would have been like, hey, if, we're not anti-women, I mean, look, we got even though we're trying to take away reproductive health care, I mean, look, there's a woman here and she's defending it. Carrie Lake, Kristi Noem could have done that perfectly. And they couldn't pick Kristi Noem because she shot her dog. I had to actually read the excerpt because at first I was like, nah, like, people shoot their dog, when it's sick or, maybe it was like 16 years old or something. It's like, healthy dog. Woo! Yeah. Oh, this election.